My name is Lina Hart. I'm 29 years old, and I used to be the client relationship manager at Brightway Consultancy, a firm praised for its precision, but infamous for its cold, ruthless processes. It was a place where people were trained to believe that feelings had no place in business, and I was, by their standards, an anomaly. For over a year, I quietly built something that no one else at Brightway cared to see, while the rest of the company obsessed over numbers, metrics, and sterile efficiency charts. I built connections with real people, real clients, and real stories. I believed that remembering someone's daughter's name or following up on their mother's surgery mattered. I believed that relationships were more than signed contracts and processed invoices. But Cameron Blake, the chief operations officer, did not share that belief. From the moment I joined, he made it clear that in his eyes, I was just a replaceable gear in a much larger, much colder machine. He called my work excess baggage more than once, sometimes within earshot of others, as if to remind me of my place. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning during a quarterly leadership meeting. The room was filled with executives, senior managers, and team leads. It was supposed to be a strategy session, but for me, it became an execution. Without warning, Cameron pulled up my project on the main screen, a project I had spent over 12 months building, perfecting, and nurturing. He introduced it not as a success, but as a case study in failure. This, he said, tapping his pointer against the screen with a sharp, calculated pause, is an example of wasted resources, low-speed, high-cost processes that deliver no tangible outcomes. He tore apart my work piece by piece in front of the entire leadership team, reducing my year-long effort to a string of unproductive conversations and inefficient relationship maintenance. Then, with a chilling kind of finality, he said, "We don't have room for inefficiency at Brightway." His finger hovered over the delete key. I felt my throat tighten as the words, "file permanently deleted," flashed across the screen. I watched everything I had built, the meetings, the follow-ups, the client stories erased with a single click. It was humiliating. It was meant to be. But as the room sank into an uncomfortable silence, my phone buzzed on the table. The message lit up the screen. "We've been following your work. We'd like to offer you $600 per year to join us immediately." In that moment, I realized something Cameron hadn't. By trying to erase me, he had just detonated the first domino in his own collapse, and I would be there to witness every piece as it fell. Cameron thought he had silenced me with one click, but he had only ignited something far more powerful. The truth is, the foundation of what I built could never be deleted because it didn't live in spreadsheets, it lived in people. When I first joined Brightway Consultancy 18 months ago, Cameron didn't bother hiding his disdain for my role. During my very first week, as we crossed paths in the hallway, he glanced at my badge and said, "Client relations. Just follow the templates. You're not here to reinvent the wheel." His tone wasn't cruel. It was worse. It was indifferent. To him, client relationships were administrative work, a necessary evil, a series of scheduled calls to tick off a checklist. His mantra was simple process, invoice, close, no emotion, no wasted minutes, no deviations from the script. He reminded me often that the real heroes of the company were the strategy analysts, the data architects, the deal closers. People like me were just background noise. But I have never been able to treat people like numbers. Something in me rejected the notion that humans could be compressed into data points. I couldn't reduce a 10-year client partnership to a quarterly report or a satisfaction score. So I began doing what no one else in that office dared to do. I made space for real conversations. When a client's child got accepted into college, I sent a handwritten congratulatory note. When a customer casually mentioned their spouse's surgery during a routine call, I followed up weeks later to ask how the recovery was going. When one of our oldest accounts experienced a supply chain crisis, I stayed on the phone with them at 10 p.m. to brainstorm solutions, even though no one expected me to. Cameron noticed, of course. He always did. He would stop by my desk, arms crossed, watching me with that practiced smirk as I wrapped up a 40-minute call that, by his standards, should have taken 12. "You're spending too long on these touch points. Hart," he'd say, tapping his watch as if he were performing a mercy. "Efficiency is the lifeblood of this company." But I wasn't chasing efficiency. I was chasing connection. And something remarkable began to happen. Clients started bypassing our standard communication channels. They called me directly. They requested to schedule their reviews with me instead of with their assigned teams. Some even changed their meeting times to align with my availability. It wasn't the service packages or price structures that kept them loyal. It was the conversations, the remembered details, the quiet assurance that they were more than just account numbers. I saw it in the retention rates, which began to climb steadily. Quarter after quarter, I saw it in the unexpected referrals from clients who had never recommended Brightway to anyone before. And yet, Cameron refused to acknowledge it. At leadership meetings, when the improved client metrics were discussed, he would attribute them to improved back-end processing or optimized workflows. My name never crossed his lips. Perhaps that should have bothered me, but I was too invested in the work itself to care. I wasn't building for applause, I was building because it felt right. Then came the turning point I should have seen coming. Cameron summoned me to his office one Friday afternoon. His desk was immaculate, his screens glowing with dashboards and color-coded charts. He didn't offer me a seat. "I need you to conduct a comprehensive audit of all your client interactions over the past 18 months, he said flatly, scrolling through his tablet without meeting my eyes. "Every call, every email, every touch point, I want detailed logs and outcomes for each." He didn't need to say the rest. It was a punishment disguised as a project. Cameron wanted to bury me in busy work. He wanted to drown me in bureaucracy until I either collapsed under the weight or made a mistake big enough for him to justify my removal. It was a power play, one I understood all too well. But instead of pushing back, I accepted, calmly, quietly. And I worked. I worked through weekends. I combed through thousands of emails. I reconstructed call summaries, documented every client success story, and meticulously connected each relationship to tangible revenue streams. By the time I finished, I had assembled an 80-page audit, not just a defense of my methods, but a financial case for why my approach had generated more than $500,000 in additional revenue for the company. I thought, for a brief moment, that maybe Cameron would finally see. But I had underestimated just how far he would go to protect his version of success. I didn't realize that my audit wasn't a lifeline. It was bait, a perfectly staged trap. Cameron didn't want proof. He wanted a public execution, and I was walking straight into it. I thought I was presenting evidence that would finally shift Cameron's perspective, but what I had actually done was step neatly into the snare he had set for me. He never wanted the audit to prove anything. He wanted it to destroy me, publicly, irreversibly. 2 days after I submitted the 80-page report, meticulously linking each client interaction to measurable revenue, Cameron approached me with an expression I hadn't seen before. It wasn't his usual thinly veiled annoyance. This time, it was something colder, calculated, almost pleasant. "You've done well, Lina," he said, his tone uncharacteristically soft. "This is the kind of deep dive analysis the company needs. In fact, I think it's worth sharing with a wider audience." I remember feeling an odd mix of suspicion and hope. For a brief second, I believed maybe, just maybe, Cameron was finally ready to acknowledge my work, but I should have recognized the glint in his eye. It wasn't admiration, it was anticipation. "I've scheduled you to present your audit at the upcoming annual strategic forum," he continued, sliding a printed agenda across his desk. "It's an excellent opportunity. You'll be speaking directly to the executive board and several of our key partners. The annual strategic forum was the most high-profile internal event of the year. Department heads, board members, senior consultants, and representatives from our biggest accounts would all be there." Cameron framed it as a chance for me to showcase best practices, to demonstrate client success stories. But underneath the polished veneer, I could feel the setup tightening around me like a noose. There was no turning back. Declining the invitation would have been career suicide. And so, I prepared. For the next week, I refined my presentation with obsessive care. I rehearsed every transition, every data point, every client story. I believed that if I presented the facts clear, irrefutable, financially sound, I would finally be respected. Maybe not liked, but respected. The morning of the forum arrived with that brittle tension that clings to corporate showpieces. The main auditorium was bright, sharp, and sterile. Rows of suits filled the seats, their name tags gleaming under the sterile lights. Cameron sat near the front, arms folded, his face unreadable. When it was my turn, I stepped up to the stage, clicked on my presentation, and began walking through the data. I showed how personalized communication had not only improved client satisfaction, but directly generated over $500,000 in additional revenue. I laid out the retention improvements, the referral spikes, the client testimonials. For the first 10 minutes, the room was silent in that attentive way that makes you think you're getting through. Then Cameron stood up. "Thank you, Lina," he said, moving toward the stage with a slow, deliberate pace. "If you don't mind, I'd like to add some additional context to this presentation." Something in the air shifted. He took the remote from my hand and clicked to a slide I had never prepared. It was an internal policy slide, one I hadn't included, but one he clearly had waiting. He turned to face the audience. "While Lina's report is thorough, we must also address a critical issue: professional boundaries. What you've just seen is a case study in inefficiency and process violation," he said, his voice perfectly measured. He began scrolling through examples. I had detailed notes about clients' family members, follow-ups about their vacations, weekend check-ins. "These are not best practices," he continued. "These are inappropriate deviations from our standard protocols. Personal inquiries like these are not part of our service agreements." I felt my pulse thundering in my ears. I looked out at the sea of faces, most of them suddenly avoiding eye contact with me. Cameron kept going. "What we are witnessing," he said, gesturing toward the screen, "is an unsanctioned, unmeasured use of company time and resources. Building personal rapport is not part of our efficiency model. It undermines our standardized approach and creates vulnerabilities." He clicked through my carefully built charts as though he were picking through garbage. And then, in front of everyone, he opened the master file, the one containing the entire audit database, and without so much as a pause, he pressed delete. "Effective immediately," he declared. "This methodology is discontinued. We will return to streamlined, policy-compliant client communications." The screen went blank. There was a long, unbearable silence. I glanced at the executives seated at the front. Most were shifting uncomfortably, some scribbling notes, a few whispering among themselves. Cameron turned to me with a thin, victorious smile. "You're dismissed," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. I picked up my phone from the podium, numb, my thoughts spinning in fragments. One message was still glowing on the screen. "We're serious about our offer. Let's talk today." Cameron had staged the perfect public execution, but he didn't realize that while he had just deleted my files, he hadn't deleted my relationships, and that was about to cost him everything. Cameron thought he had delivered the final blow when he deleted my work in front of the entire company. What he didn't realize was that the destruction he so confidently executed was the trigger that would quietly, but inevitably, unravel everything he believed he had secured. As I walked out of the auditorium, my phone buzzed again, a second call from Vanguard Nexus. The same recruiter who had texted me during the meeting was now offering not just a job, but a leadership role with full autonomy over client strategy. They wanted me, not just my skill set, not just my notes, but my philosophy, my way of building relationships. And they were willing to pay double my current salary to make it happen. I paused in the hallway, the weight of the offer settling in. It wasn't just the money. It was the validation. Someone else had been watching. Someone else had seen what Cameron had so violently refused to acknowledge. I turned around and walked back into the auditorium. Cameron was still basking in his moment of supposed triumph, reciting the next phases of his efficiency recalibration to a room that now felt uneasy, fractured. He didn't notice me at first as I stepped onto the stage. The soft shuffle of my footsteps caught his attention only when I was already by the podium. "Actually," I said, my voice steady, "before we continue, I have an announcement. Cameron's jaw tightened. This isn't the time. It is. I interrupted, my eyes sweeping across the crowd that had just watched me be erased. Effective immediately. I am resigning from Brightway Consultancy. Murmurs rippled through the room. Cameron's confidence faltered for the first time. You can't just... My contract allows for immediate resignation in cases of hostile work environments, I said, pulling out my phone and holding up the clause I had long memorized. Public humiliation and the destruction of my professional work certainly qualify. I saw the color drain from his face. And for those wondering, I've already accepted an offer with Vanguard Nexus. I continued, my tone calm but unyielding. They've given me complete freedom to lead their client relationship strategy, something this company never valued. The silence that followed was absolute. Without another word, I gathered my notes and walked off the stage, my steps slow but deliberate, leaving Cameron to stand in the wreckage of his own making. In the following days, I officially signed with Vanguard Nexus. Their office was smaller but alive, buzzing with ambition, creativity, and a genuine interest in building real client partnerships. They welcomed my approach as not just valuable, but essential. I didn't reach out to any of Brightway's clients. I didn't need to. I simply updated my professional profiles, made my new role visible, and went to work. It didn't take long. By the end of my first week, the first call came. It was from Gerald Beck, the CEO of a logistics company I'd worked with extensively. He told me he had heard about my departure through the professional network and wanted to explore options with Vanguard Nexus. I stayed with Brightway because of you. Lina, he said, I trust you, not their templates. 2 more clients called the next day, 4 more by the end of the week. Within a month, 7 of Brightway's largest accounts had either initiated transitions or fully migrated to Vanguard Nexus. I didn't solicit them. I didn't need to convince anyone. They came because they valued being remembered, being cared for, being seen as more than numbers. Meanwhile, I began hearing stories about the unraveling back at Brightway. Cameron's new streamlined protocols failed almost immediately. Clients who were once fiercely loyal now felt like they were speaking to strangers. The cold efficiency Cameron prized left no space for connection, no room for trust to grow. Brightway's internal teams scrambled to retain the accounts slipping away, but they were too late. The relationships weren't tied to the company, they were tied to me. It wasn't sabotage. It was gravity. People naturally follow those who remember their stories. 3 weeks after my departure, Cameron reportedly reached out to several of the lost clients himself. He was met with polite refusals and, in some cases, direct explanations they preferred working with someone who cared. By the second month, the revenue shortfalls could no longer be contained. Brightway faced a sudden and severe client retention crisis. Emergency meetings were held, restructuring plans were whispered about, and Cameron's confident posture began to crack under the weight of mounting losses. I didn't celebrate his downfall, but I watched it unfold exactly as I knew it would. What unfolded next was not a revenge I orchestrated. It was a quiet, natural consequence. I didn't have to tear anything down. I simply had to step away and let gravity do its work. Cameron had demolished the only structure holding Brightway's client base together, and now, piece by piece, the entire foundation was crumbling beneath him. In the first 2 weeks at Vanguard Nexus, I stayed silent. I didn't reach out to a single former client. I didn't send a single email, make a single call, or offer any proposals. All I did was update my professional profiles to reflect my new role. I made no promises, extended no invitations. I focused entirely on understanding Vanguard's internal systems and building strategies for their current, modest client base. The first contact came sooner than I expected. It was Gerald Beck again, but this time it wasn't a casual check-in. He called my direct line at Vanguard on a Tuesday morning. His voice was firm, but laced with something softer relief. Lina, I've spoken with Brightway since you left, he said. It's not the same. They're following their new scripts, their processes, but none of it feels human anymore. They called me 3 times last week, each time with a new account manager who didn't remember the last conversation. I'm not interested in building from scratch with them. I'd like to move our entire contract to you if that's something you're open to. I paused, taking in the weight of what he was saying. "I'm open to building something better," I replied. Over the next few days, the calls multiplied. Mira Donovan, the operations director from a longtime partner in the healthcare sector, reached out, her frustration barely concealed. "Brightway keeps sending people who sound like robots. I'm done. I need someone who actually understands how my company works." Elliot Granger, whose family-owned business I had helped navigate a rough merger the year before, left me a voicemail saying simply, "I'm moving." "You're the reason we stayed as long as we did." Client after client. They came not because I asked, but because I had built something with them that couldn't be transferred, replicated, or replaced. They weren't chasing price points or service tiers. They were following connection, trust, and memory. By the end of the first month, 7 of Brightway's largest accounts had either fully migrated to Vanguard Nexus or were in active transition. I learned later, through quiet conversations in professional circles, that Cameron was panicking. He was calling clients directly, something he had rarely done before, desperately trying to hold them. He offered discounts, expedited services, even personal oversight. But the damage was irreversible. One client reportedly told him, "You're asking me to stay, but you're the reason I'm leaving." It wasn't just the clients that left. Some of Brightway's internal staff began to question the leadership that had championed efficiency over substance. A few reached out to me privately, asking if Vanguard Nexus was hiring. News of Brightway's unraveling spread quickly in the industry. It wasn't just that they were losing clients, it was who they were losing. The departures hit their prestige accounts, the ones they used in their own marketing materials, the ones who attended their networking events. These weren't minor losses, they were critical. Meanwhile, at Vanguard, we were growing at a pace no one anticipated. My approach wasn't just accepted, it was embraced, institutionalized, celebrated. Vanguard gave me a team and the freedom to expand the personal relationship model I had quietly developed at Brightway. The success wasn't in aggressive scaling, it was in building depth, one relationship at a time. Clients began referring other businesses to us, not because we were cheaper or faster, but because we listened, because we cared. Within 3 months, Brightway was visibly collapsing. Cameron's desperate strategies failed to stem the exodus. The board, once unwavering in their support, began demanding answers he could no longer give. He blamed me, at first. He argued that I had somehow undermined client loyalty or violated professional ethics. But the timeline betrayed him. The clients didn't leave immediately after I resigned. They left after experiencing Brightway without the human connection I provided. When clients were faced with a choice between faceless efficiency and personal partnership, they chose over and over not Brightway, but the approach Cameron had publicly destroyed. It wasn't a coup. It was a quiet migration, and it hollowed Brightway from the inside out. I heard, through a mutual contact, that Cameron attempted to salvage his position by proposing a relationship rebuilding initiative. He wanted to hire a new team to emulate the strategies he had once deemed inefficient. But by then, it was too late. The trust was gone. The clients were gone, and soon, Cameron was too. By the end of the 3rd month, the Brightway board voted to remove him. He was dismissed in an emergency session, his exit quiet, almost clinical. The man who had erased me in front of the company was now the one being erased behind closed doors. Brightway stood at the edge of bankruptcy. They initiated massive layoffs, sold their secondary office space, and entered acquisition talks with a larger, more rigid firm that prioritized metrics over relationships. They were dissolving in the very image Cameron had always pursued: efficient, streamlined, and completely devoid of what made them valuable in the first place. I didn't feel triumph. What I felt was something colder clarity. This wasn't revenge. It was the natural conclusion of choices made, of values held, of people disregarded. Cameron had set his own game in motion. I simply chose to walk away from the table. Cameron's fall wasn't loud. It didn't arrive with headlines or scandal. It happened quietly, inevitably, in the way that poorly built structures eventually collapse under their own weight. I didn't have to be there to see it happen. I already knew. 3 weeks after his dismissal, Cameron tried to reach me. The first message was a carefully worded email from his personal account. He expressed regret over how things had unfolded, suggested that perhaps we had both acted hastily, and asked if I would consider returning to Brightway in a leadership capacity to help stabilize what you helped build. The second message came through a recruiter. This time, the offer was specific. A compensation package nearly triple what I had earned before, with full creative control over the client relations division. They wanted me to lead the turnaround effort. The irony was sharp. They were now offering me everything I had once fought to prove I deserved. The same methodologies they publicly dismissed, the same philosophies they deleted in front of an entire company, were now the principles they wanted to rebuild around. The approach they had called inefficient was now their only hope of survival. But I didn't need to go back. I didn't need to save them. I had already found the place where my work was not just tolerated, but valued from the beginning. I no longer needed to seek validation from those who had proven how little they could see beyond their own narrow definitions of success. I declined the offer with a short, polite response. I felt no anger, no bitterness, just certainty. 6 months after joining Vanguard Nexus, I was promoted to Vice President of Client Strategy. I was given the mandate to expand our relationship-first approach across the entire organization. We didn't chase efficiency at the expense of connection. We didn't push clients through rigid pipelines. We built trust, one real conversation at a time. What began as my quiet resistance at Brightway became the foundation of Vanguard's most successful year. We didn't just grow, we thrived. Clients came because they wanted to work with people who remembered their stories, who cared about the details others forgot. Our retention rates soared. Our referral network exploded, and slowly, across the industry, companies began to shift. Relationship-based strategies that had once been dismissed as wasted time now appeared in professional development programs, keynote speeches, and corporate playbooks. What I had built in the margins had become the new standard. Brightway, meanwhile, was reduced to a footnote. They merged with a larger firm focused solely on operational efficiency. Their name disappeared from the market. Their philosophy disappeared with them. I heard that Cameron struggled to find a comparable position. His reputation was tied to Brightway's collapse, and though no one spoke about it publicly, the industry remembered. Potential employers understood the story without needing the details. But I no longer needed that story to define me. I no longer needed to win against him. I had already won where it mattered. What stayed with me wasn't the collapse of Brightway. It was the quiet, consistent success I built at Vanguard, surrounded by people who believed in the work from the start, people who didn't need to be convinced that personal connection mattered. I realized, fully and finally, that my worth was never something they had the power to grant or deny. It had never belonged to them. The life I wanted, the work I believed in it was mine to claim all along. I didn't need their permission. I didn't need their acceptance. And I certainly didn't need to go back. The final time Cameron reached out a brief, last attempt through a mutual acquaintance, I didn't respond. Not because I was angry, but because there was nothing left to say. Some doors, once closed, should stay closed. One autumn morning, as I prepared to lead a strategic meeting that would shape the future of Vanguard's client operations, I paused at the threshold of the conference room. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, casting long, quiet beams across the polished floor. I stepped inside, closed the door behind me, and took my seat at the head of the table. I didn't need anyone to tell me I belonged there. I already knew. There's a quiet freedom in realizing that your value isn't determined by who chooses to see it. FAMGA does not wait for permission. It isn't granted by the approval of those who once dismissed you. It isn't restored by the same hands that tried to erase you. FAMGA stands on its own, and sometimes all it takes to claim it is the simple, steady act of standing up, turning away from the places that made you small, and stepping fully into the life you were always meant to lead, without apology, without explanation, without asking for anyone's permission.